Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today's video, I am testing out drugstore and high-end makeup sponges. The reason why I am testing different makeup sponges is because I have been using the Beauty Blender for forever, and lately it has just not been making the cut for me. Lately, when I wash my Beauty Blender, it seems to be tearing a lot more often than what I'm used to, which means I have to replace it, and it really compromises the quality of my Beauty Blender. So because I know there are so many different types of makeup sponges out there, I figured now would be the perfect time for me to try something new. Keep watching to see if I was able to find any makeup sponges out there that are comparable to the Beauty Blender or even better. My name is Christine. I make beauty and life videos, so if you want to see more videos from me, then please subscribe down below. In today's video, I'm trying 6 different sponges. 3 of them are drugstore and then 3 of them are from Sephora. For each of the sponge, I will be applying it on my face so you can see how it looks like on the skin. Some of them you can actually wear wet and or dried. I have never personally applied foundation on my face with a dry sponge, so this will be interesting to say the least. The way I was able to pick out each sponge was kind of different. So for Sephora, I went on the website and I looked at reviews for makeup sponges. So I looked for the top reviewed makeup sponges and kind of picked out the 2 of the ones that looked interesting and had a really high reviews, which was the Fenty makeup sponge and the Tarte makeup sponge. And then the Sephora brand actually has quite a bit of makeup sponges as well. So I went through and looked at the reviews for their brand, the makeup sponges that they carry, and I picked one of the top highly rated, I guess, makeup sponge and what I thought would probably work best for me. The way I was able to pick the drugstore makeup sponges were, for one, the Real Techniques one. I actually saw Casey Holmes use it in one of her videos, or maybe a couple of her videos, and just the size of it was so cute that I had to find it, which I did at Target. And then the other 2 I picked out because I was at Target and I knew I was going to be trying a couple of different makeup sponges. I just kind of went through the aisles and looked at the different brands and the different types of makeup sponges that are around or that they had, and stumbled upon the e.l.f. one and also the Up and Up brand. So that is how I picked out these makeup sponges to try. The first makeup sponge that I'm using is by Real Techniques, and the packaging says you can use it dry or wet. What I did was, on half of my face, I applied my foundation with the sponge dry, and then the other half I applied the foundation with the sponge wet. So getting right into the dry foundation process, I did not like it at all. My foundation did not spread evenly, and I honestly didn't even know where my foundation went, most likely into the sponge. Now, while applying the foundation with the sponge wet, it worked 100% better, but the sponge is way too big and I could not get into the small crevices of my face, like in between my nose and right under my eye area. The packaging also says that this is for face and body, so I think this sponge would work great if you're using it for your face and your body, but just for face alone, I'm not quite sure how it's going to work for me, but this is one of the ones where I did really like the quality, so I will keep trying it to see how I feel. The second makeup sponge that I tried is the Up and Up one by Target, and it says you can use it dry or wet. When applying my foundation with the dry sponge, it was exactly the same results as the Real Techniques one. I did not like it whatsoever. Now, when applying my foundation with the sponge wet, it was a lot better, but not 100% better. And it did give me some coverage, but I still feel like it was too dense and it didn't spread my foundation evenly. The third makeup sponge that I used is by e.l.f. and this one is applied wet only. And the reason why I say wet only is because the packaging didn't say anything about using this sponge dry. This sponge was way too soft and it sucked up way more foundation than the Up and Up one. So I'm definitely not going to use it again. I don't think it did anything for my foundation. And as you can see in the clip, it looked like nothing happened. I'm definitely not going to use this again, and I would actually prefer the Up and Up over this one if I had to choose between the two. The fourth makeup sponge that I tried is by Tarte, and now we are getting into the high-end sponges. So for the Tarte one, it is to be used wet only because, again, the packaging did not mention anything about using it dry or wet. So after wetting the sponge, I think, and applying my foundation, I think this worked very well. It spread my foundation evenly on my skin, and it's a different shape, but I feel like it was very practical as well. The only downside is if you start with the pointy side, applying your foundation, and you switch to the flat side, you would probably need to apply a little more foundation because all of your foundation is on the other end of the sponge. The fifth makeup sponge that I tried is by Sephora, and it says you can use it dry or wet as well. So something interesting happened. The dry part actually didn't work as terrible as the other ones that I had just tried. So what I mean by that is applying my foundation dried with this sponge actually worked, but I would still not use this sponge just dry. As for applying my foundation with the Sephora sponge wet, I think it worked way better than, of course, when it was dried. And one thing that really surprised me about this sponge is that it actually has a really great shape, especially the tip, the pointy part. I actually like it better than the Beauty Blender because it could really get right under my eye area. And the Beauty Blender it does have that pointy tip as well, but when it gets wet, the sponge gets a little bigger, and you have to kind of really press to get into the inner corners. But with the Sephora one, it does get bigger, but not too big to where you could actually put the tip right underneath your eye area and in the inner corners, closer to the inner corners of your eye. So I really, really liked that. Another really interesting fact about the Sephora makeup sponge was the fact that it actually soaked up way more foundation than the Target Up and Up makeup sponge. However, because I like the shape of this sponge so much, I think I would actually keep trying it out. The last makeup sponge that I used is by Fenty, and it also says you can use this sponge dry or wet as well. And because I was so excited about this particular sponge, I've already used it one other time before, but here are my thoughts. The Fenty sponge worked the best out of all of them while it was dried. I would still not use this particular makeup sponge dried. While it was wet, the sponge was very, very, very soft. But it was really hard to get under my eye area because of the shape of the sponge. So I know there's the flat top piece. I wasn't quite sure how to use that right underneath my eye. However, I will say that the Fenty sponge came in second place when it comes to applying my foundation evenly all over the skin. I'm sure most of you guessed it. I'm never going to use any of these sponges dry ever again. Lesson learned. I just don't understand why you would want to use a sponge dry when 100% of the time, if you wet the sponge, it works way better than dry. So that's just a no-go for me, not my style. It doesn't work. If you're going to use a dry sponge, you might as well just use a brush at that point because you're definitely gonna get better results than a dry sponge. I think I would end up using all of these makeup sponges again with the exception of the e.l.f. one and the Up and Up one just because I don't know, I just didn't really like them. The bads were way too bad. My favorite drugstore one was definitely the Real Techniques one. Even though it's way too big for my face, I would love to try it again to see how it applies when I don't have my eye makeup on. My favorite high-end one was the Tarte one. And I'm excited that I found one that I actually like, except I'm not super excited because it's the exact same price as a Beauty Blender one, but that's okay. It's a lot more practical and I really like the shape of it, so I'm excited to see how it wears as I use it a lot more. And a side note, that particular sponge is actually the most similar to the Beauty Blender, and I know this because I wet the Beauty Blender while I was applying each one of these, and I was squeezing each one to compare them, and the Tarte one was the closest. Please comment down below which makeup sponge you currently use. I would love to know, and how you use it and if you like it. Thank you guys so much for joining me in today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!